And the way I often illustrate this is with a popular chocolate candy. And so if you take a bag of these candies and you open them up, these are M&Ms. I've seen them for sale here in Moscow. And you count the number of brown ones and red ones and orange ones, and you put that in a graph, you come up with something interesting. So let's make a quick spreadsheet of this. This was, I did this with a small group of people, and we looked at these. Now, interestingly, there were not, even the total number of M&Ms was not consistent in the bags. But if you look, okay, let's go down to the let's look at these averages here. So the average brown is about 5. So how many people are at average if we just look at the browns? 3, right? A, N, and O are all average. They all at 5. Okay, the next one is 3. Let's round up. How many people have 5 and 3? Only O. The next one is 13. Uh-oh. Suddenly, nobody is average, right? Not a single group, or not a single person in this group was average. And if we imagine that those are not just the numbers of colored candies that everyone has, but if we imagine that those are literacies that people have, capabilities that people have, it turns out that when people come to our schools, nobody is average. Some person is stronger in one field, some person is stronger than in another. And we have to have all of those capabilities nurtured. It turns out that in most of our schools, we're really only focusing on these 3 things, because those are the things from the original 7 liberal arts. Those are the pieces that survive. But now, these, we heard already from the stage, we saw from those children that collaborational literacy, my ability to work together, is vital. My ability to tell a compelling story in media is vital. My understanding of how to connect and have empathy for other people is vital in this new world. I've got to be building not for an average student, but for students who come as they are and who are diverse. This is where Russia's contribution of Vygotsky is so important. How did we get to the averages in the candies in the first place? Well, we got to them because we pooled all of our resources. Vygotsky's notion that learning is inherently social is the only way for us to meet those averages, to form those averages, for us to be as strong as we can be. Because that means I leverage your strength for my weakness, and you leverage my strength for yours. This is essential. This is why slime mold works, because it collaborates. And this man is underappreciated, but so important. His understanding is so important to education. Fundamentally, what Todd Rose says is that humans are dynamic systems. We are not individuals. We are systems of characteristics. And because of that, there are 3 things we have to do very well. The first thing we have to remember is to keep data jagged, he says. So the average IQ is something like 113 or 120, I've forgotten. We could both have that same average IQ, but you could be at that average because you have great spatial understandings, and I could be at that average because I have great verbal understandings. We are not the same, even though our numbers would suggest we are. And if you reduce us to numbers, we lose the diversity. So you have to keep not the numeric data, but you have to keep the individual self in mind. The second thing he says is that we act more by context than by trait. So some of us know that we're very different people when we're home with our families than we are at our work or that we are with strangers. Some people are very comfortable up here on stage, but very shy when they're out talking to people individually. Context determines who we are. The last characteristic he says is that people always follow multiple paths. Now, Rose is at Harvard. He runs a brain institute at Harvard, but he nearly failed high school. And what he had to learn was that he had to take his own path to success. As teachers, we need not to prescribe the path that someone has to follow, just the goal, so that everyone can take whatever path works for them to get there. That's part of that diversity. Our goal, therefore, is not any longer to build these sort of grids of information and to take each student and try to cram them in their appropriate space on the grid. You fit here, except you don't. I'm going to have to cut parts of you off and kind of cram you in, and you fit here. Instead, what we need to do is build multidimensional frameworks in which each learner brings whatever skill or capability that person has to work together collaboratively. You're really good at organizing things. You bring that part. You're so good at telling stories. You bring that part. You're really good at data and research. You bring that part. We'll put those together and make something. If we want collaborative students, we have to have them collaborating in our classrooms. And that's not to say that we give up being tough, being hard, being rigorous. In fact, rigor is what makes people, relevance, is what makes people commit. When something matters to them, they will work very hard for it. Let me give you a weird example of this. So let's take a basic skill like cooking, and let's imagine that we're in cooking class. Welcome to Cooking 101. Thank you for coming. Cooking is going to be very important in your life. You'll need to know how to eat and things and cook to eat. So I'll be your teacher for this term. In the first unit, at our first week, we're going to start with a unit on spoons. Spoons are very important to cooking, and when we start cooking, you'll need to know about spoons and how to use them. They're good for stirring and tasting, and I want to start with something easy so everyone can succeed. At week 4, we'll move on to knives. Now, I don't want to move on to knives until we've really got our spoon skills down. When we start cooking, having good knife skills will be important, but knives are dangerous. You could cut yourself, you can cause injury, so let's make sure we've got our spoon skills down, then we'll move to knives. At week 8, we'll do a unit on pots and pans. Now, this is a big unit. There's a lot of different kinds of kitchen equipment to understand how to use. There will be an exam on this unit. So pay special attention, because when we start cooking, you will need to know how to use all of the appropriate pots and pans, which one to use for which purpose. So this is very difficult. At week 14, we will begin to learn about stoves. Now, stoves are dangerous. You could cause an explosion, so you could burn yourself. So that's our final unit here. Well, we don't really have time to start cooking, but next year, actually, not next year. After graduation, when you start cooking, these will be very important skills. How many of you have been in that course? How many of you, if you were in that course, would kill yourself at week 4 with the knives? Here's the key. How do you learn to cook? By cooking. You learn by cooking. You learn all of that information, not first. You learn it by using it. You learn it by cooking. Here is the secret to successful schools. Always cook from day one. Always cook. Don't teach people how to use the tools. They'll figure it out. Always cook. There was a researcher at Michigan State University. He's now gone to Arizona State University, Punya Mishra. And he and his team were trying to understand what learning looks like in the 21st century. And they took all of the most cited 21st century learning paradigms, knowledge paradigms, and they tried to see what the comparisons were. So this is all kinds of things. This is the EU Parliament. This is Howard Gardner's 5 Minds for the Future, and Henry Jenkins talking about participatory culture, and all kinds of people. They put these together, and what they decided 21st century learning looks like is 3 things. Foundational knowledge to know, humanistic knowledge to value, and meta-knowledge to act. The new things are those 2 on the bottom. So, foundational knowledge, this is your understanding of the core content. This is your ability to talk with people in other disciplines. And this is your understanding of digital tools in that discipline. To value, this is cultural competence, ethical and emotional awareness, life and job skills. To act, this is your ability to communicate and collaborate, problem solving and critical thinking, creativity and innovation. Those 3 things. That's 21st century learning when you compare all the models. And I think that those 3 actually connect to my 3. Because the foundational knowledge is the content that a community of practitioners values, whether they're fishermen or physicists. This is the information you need to know, as determined by this community of practitioners. We value things because, in context, this community teaches me how to value that. And I act when I can take that content and use it in a context to make things. And again, we have to bring in our 6 characteristics of ecosystems, right? So the community has to be diverse and relational, content dynamic and sustainable. Context has to be balanced and torsional. I learn to value by collaborating with other people. I learn to know by curating that information, by deciding what's relevant, what's outdated, what's false, what's true. Not a teacher, but me understanding what to value, to curate that. And I learn to act by creating, by making. It turns out that I think the way school should work is that students should have a series of learning challenges that they help decide. And our task as teachers is to wrap around those challenges the DNA of learning, putting them in a context that's meaningful, in connection with a community of people who can help them learn and helping them access that content that they need to make those projects and solve that challenge. Typically, what we've done is we've started in traditional learning with content first. You have to get a certain proficiency of content. You have to learn all of the tools, and then we allow you to use them in context and community. But now what we see is the reverse happening more and more. People start in context and community, and that's how they learn the content. The traditional method is really about control. I'm limiting access because access is already unavailable to most people. But now it's about engagement and experience. So very quickly to sum up, here's what I think these look like in 2 different models. The overall paradigm moves from being about delivery to being about discovery. The social structure moves from a hierarchy with the teacher at the top to a community, just like in ecosystems. And the context is no longer the classroom, it is the world, which means my environment doesn't have to be simulated anymore. I don't have to fake things. I can use real information in the real world. That means that the content of my course is no longer fixed and something I decided months before the class even began. It is open, and students will bring whatever they discover on a given day. That means that my assignments can no longer be recipes. They have to be frameworks. I don't know if we can make borscht. I don't know if people will bring beets. I have to be open to making whatever students bring. And that means that our activities can no longer be about consumption and repetition. They have to be about construction, which is building with things that already exist, and creation, which is building with things that have never existed before. The infrastructure is no longer about control. It's about empowerment. And The assessment is no longer just me as the teacher assessing students, it's the community of people. I used to have students write things, and I was the grader. Now I have them write them and publish them. Let's see what the community has to say about that. The process is no longer standardized. Us all doing the same thing at the same time in the same way. It is personalized, each student finding that path, that personal path. And the motivation is no longer extrinsic and focused on grades and certification. It's intrinsic and focused on skills and experience. Armed with new technologies that connect us and give us access in any context, I am convinced that education in the 21st century has nothing to lose but its chains. Thank you very much.
Глава компании Unfold Learning, директор по обучению Apple 2013-2016 Уильям Ранкин. Итак, дорогие друзья, на очереди у нас следующий спикер в завершении первой большой торжественной части нашей сегодняшней встречи. На прямой связи по скайпу из-за океана евангелист образования Google Джейми Касап. Давайте попробуем вывести нашего многоуважаемого спикера в прямой эфир. А я надеюсь, технические возможности нам, конечно же, сейчас в этом помогут.
Am I on? All right. So good to go. Thank you very much for having me. First, I want to apologize for not being able to be there in person. Lots of issues, but we won't get into that because I only have about 15 minutes and wanted to cover a couple of kind of key points around what's happening in education, in general around technology and education. I want to start with some contact information. I'm sorry again that I can't be there in person, but the great thing about social media is that there's a great way to connect and keep conversations going and following hashtags to see what's going on at the conference. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm also on Google+, and our team, I would encourage you to follow our team as well. Our team is pretty engaged with posting blog posts and posting updates on Twitter. So make sure that you connect with our team on Twitter as well. I would also encourage you to visit our website. We have a lot of great material. It sounds weird for the guy from Google to say you should visit our website, but not the google.com website, but the Google for Education. So you can do a search for Google for Education and find some of the great material that our team has created and put online, including certification programs that we have for Google Apps, and for educators. We have some great material for those that are interested in computer science, some great material around curriculums for computer science. We have some great coding camp stuff that we do. So a lot of great material that's available online. So I would encourage all of you to visit our website and go online and see what we have there. So in a couple minutes that I have here, it doesn't matter if it's 15 minutes or whether it's an hour. I always like to start with this idea that we are in education because we understand how important education is. That education is what disrupts poverty, and it always has. It's that education is what changes communities. It's education that changes families. It's education that changes society. And we all believe that. That's why we are involved in events like this. This is why we are doing the work that we do. For me, it's a personal passion. I live here in the United States. And I am a first-generation American who my mother had come from Argentina, and I was born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York, and education is the American dream. You get your education, you work hard, and you can accomplish anything. And so for me, education is a very personal, passionate thing for me because I understand the importance that education brings, because it's not just for the students that we have in our classroom. We have to understand that the impact that we have on students goes on for generations and generations. And that it's not just the students that we have in our classroom, but that it goes on. Because now I have my children, and I understand and I see the life that they live and what's in front of them and how fundamentally different it is for them than it was for me. And that's the real power that education brings, is that power that we can change our family's destiny in just one generation. And this is true no matter where you go in the world, whether it's here in the United States or little pueblos in Peru, or recently when I was in Argentina, you find that same passion, that education is what we need to focus on. And so if that's true, what we need to do is take education very seriously. And when I say that, what I mean is we have to really look at education, not from a education is broken perspective, as some of the rhetoric is that you hear, but more importantly, look at education and say, what's the best we can take from what education brings us, and how do we expand from that? How do we bring education to the next level? With the understanding that we don't live in this world that you see here anymore, that we don't live in a factory-based, manufacturing-based world, that we now live in a globally connected, network-based world where we're collaborating on a global scale. That's the world that we're living in. And so what we need to do is figure out, how do we bring education to the next level so that we can take advantage of them? And the reason why is because we need to focus on a bunch of new skills that our kids need. Now, when I say that, the irony is that they're not new at all. We did a survey we did a study with The Economist, and we asked employers all over the world, what are the skills that you need from your employees? What are the things that your employees need to be able to do? And this list that I'm about to show you, the most fascinating thing about this list is that it's not fascinating at all. This list has been around for a very long time, and it's a lot of the things that I'm sure speakers have talked about already and will be talking about in the future. But this is the list. It's a list that I remember when I was a kid. It's problem solving, it's collaboration, it's communications, it's critical thinking, it's creativity. These are the things that have been part of a system that we've been able to need to build for a very long time. And I think why they're more highlighted now and why they're more important today is because we don't know what the jobs of the future are. We don't know what the world will look like because jobs are being created on a daily basis and every day. We don't live in a world where we had like 10 jobs and a kid could say, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a biologist, or, we didn't have just general categories of jobs. Today we have jobs that are being developed every day. As a matter of fact, I saw something here in the United States that said that 60% of kindergarten kids are going to be working in jobs that don't exist today. And so what we need to do instead is not worry about what those jobs are going to be per se in terms of like an architect or a building architect or a computer scientist, but instead focus on developing the skills that all of us need to thrive in the 21st century. And I think the way we get there is by asking new questions in education. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what that looks like. For example, one of the questions that we ask kids all the time, and it doesn't matter where I go in the world, is, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? I hear people ask my 15-year-old that question all the time. I hear teachers and guidance counselors ask that question all the time. But the reality is, we've already established that those jobs in the future don't exist. So instead of asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? What I think we should be asking students is, what's the problem that you want to solve? What's the problem that spins in your head? Because that gets us closer to what motivates all of us, right? As Daniel Pink talked about in his book, Drive, which is autonomy, purpose, and mastery. Because when you ask a kid, what's the problem that you want to solve? You can ask them the follow-up question, which is, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? Who else is solving that problem? What blogs could you be reading? What websites are out there? Who's already solving this problem that you could work with? What research is out there? What videos and documentaries? Because now all the kids have access to all the world's information at their fingertips. And so we can actually take advantage of having this technology at our fingertips, and asking our students what problem you want to solve gets us closer to getting them to drive what the learning will look like for them. This is a picture here that you're looking at from our Google Science Fair winners from a couple of years ago. And the girl there in the middle, one of my favorite contestants, because She had a problem that she wanted to solve. She wasn't your typical science student. There was a problem, a specific problem that she wanted to solve, a global problem, if you will. She had a friend. She lived here in the United States, but she had a friend who lived in the Philippines who did not have electricity. And so she was upset that her friend couldn't read or couldn't do her homework at night. And so at 15 years old, she invented a flashlight that's powered by the heat of the human hand, right? Because she was focused on solving problems, not because she wanted to be an inventor, not because she wanted to be some specific architect or designer. It's because there was a problem that she wanted to solve. So how do we get our kids to think about problem solving? How do we get them to drive their learning from those critical questions that we can ask them up front that enrich their learning? So that's an example, one example of what we can do. Another example is this idea of iteration and understanding that we don't live in a world where we have starting points and end points anymore, that we live in a world of constant and consistent iteration, that there is no B, there is no A, there are no grades, as William was talking about, because I was kind of eavesdropping on his presentation at the end, right? We live in a world where we're constantly iterating, constantly changing, consistently changing. If you used Google last night and used it again today, you used a different version of Google because we update Google 600 plus times a year. If you use Google Apps, for example, we update Google Apps 200, 250 times a year. If you're using Chromebooks, for example, the Chromebook team launches a new operating system every 6 weeks, right? And that's just one company out of the millions of people who do this kind of work. We're constantly iterating, constantly changing. So how do we build that into our school model? So the critical question there that we need to ask is, how do we build iteration into the current school models that we have? And how do we make sure that we continue building iteration skills as we move forward? We talk about, the next slide, collaboration a lot, but we don't really mean it. Because in education is set up as a single player sport, right? It's my 15-year-old who's responsible for his grades. It's my 15-year-old that's responsible for his tests. It's my 15-year-old that's responsible for his exams, right? But at the end of the day, he's got to work with other people when he grows up. So how do we build real collaboration into our systems today? Imagine as teachers, you hand out a test, any typical test, and at the end of the test, 2 kids come up to you holding their test together saying, we decided to combine our skill set and work on this together, right? You know, that's cheating, right? We teach kids that collaborating is cheating. But in reality, real collaboration is the ability to work together. Real collaboration is the ability to listen, to ask good questions. Real collaboration is the ability to change your mind. When we look for employees at Google, one of the things that we look for is what we call leadership. And when we say leadership, we don't mean, can you tell people what to do and they'll follow you blindly, right? What we mean when we say leadership is, can you build consensus? Can you bring a team along? Can you let someone else lead so that you can take a step back and let someone else lead, right? So we're looking for real collaboration skills when we're talking about collaboration. And want to make sure that as we're talking about technology and the importance of technology, that we don't make an assumption that just because kids were born with technology, that somehow they're masters at using how to use technology. We don't necessarily need to teach them how to use technology, but we have to understand that we need to teach them how to take advantage of technology. And what I mean by that is we need to teach them how to search, how to look for information, how to vet information, how to make sure information is credible, how to make sure they're private and secure online, how to make sure they understand all the information that's coming at them and how to take advantage of that information. So we want to make sure that we understand that just because they're born with technology around them doesn't make them experts in using technology, that we need to teach them how to take advantage of technology and use it the right way. Just in the same way that when we were born, we had electricity, doesn't make us all electricians, right? We still need to learn how to take advantage of electricity. So that's a main point here, because we want to make sure that we're building the digital leaders that they need to be in the future. And so the last point here that I wanted to make is around making sure that, you know, we understand the difference between the old world and the new world and how that helps us shape what education looks like. For example, I see debates all the time about, should we have kids memorize things or should we not have kids memorize things? Well, the answer is both, right? I have a 2-year-old daughter, And I want my 2-year-old daughter to memorize things, right? Every night in the bathtub, when I give her a bath, I pull out the letters that stick to the side of the tub and I say, I pull out the A and I go, what's this? And she goes, A. And I go, yes, that's exactly right. And then I pull out the B and I go, what's this? And she goes, A. I'm like, okay, we'll keep working on it. I want her to memorize things. There's lots of things that I want her to memorize, but I also want her to understand things at a deeper level. And so it's not about necessarily just memorizing things, but how do we shape our classrooms given that now we have all the world's information at our fingertips, and that information is now a commodity, that information itself has no value. So what I think we need more than anything here as I kind of close out is to think that what we need is a culture shift, that we need to think about learning from a different perspective, that we need to ask ourselves, are we asking old education questions or new education questions? Are we asking questions that focus on the old economy, or are we asking questions that focus on a new network-based, globally based, knowledge-based economy? How do we make sure that we're doing those things? Because the good news is that it's starting to happen all over the world. I get to visit classrooms all over the world, and I'm seeing more of these student-centric learning models where students are driving their learning, where they're not even talking about personalized learning. I'm going deeper than that. I'm talking about personal learning, where kids are driving the learning, and they're driving the questions, and they're driving the research, and they're communicating what they find, and they're driving the learning in a collaborative learning model where technology is supporting and enabling what they do. Again, technology is not the silver bullet. Education is the silver bullet. Technology is there to support and enable what our kids can do in the classroom. And so we want to make sure that we set up these student-centric learning models to take advantage of technology as an enabling and supporting capability. We're starting to see more of these experimental learning models, as William was talking about building things and making things. It's no longer it doesn't make sense to sit in a classroom and learn about building things instead of actually building things. Like anything, we have to get out and do, and it's exciting to see more of these maker models take shape. And you can actually see kids developing things and building things, and not just material things, but in projects and a whole bunch of different ways. So we're starting to see that. We're starting to see more of these competency-based learning models where you're seeing teachers take advantage of the skill sets that kids need to develop, and they're learning these skills themselves. This is a picture of superintendents here in the United States learning how to program and code. And you're starting to see more of those like coding models, but that's just one example of these competencies that we're trying to build so that kids can actually demonstrate what they know and how much they know of whatever, so that they're not sitting there taking multiple choice tests with little bubble sheets, that they're actually showing you what they've been able to complete, that they can actually show you the competency that they've developed in whatever the lessons are that we're trying to teach our kids. Because at the end of the day, when that door closes in the classroom, nothing is more important than having a great teacher in the classroom. That's the most important element in education. So making sure that teachers have the professional development that they need to thrive, that they have the professional development that they need to succeed, because when that door closes, the teacher is the most important element in education. So how are we expecting to change our classes? How are we expecting to change our environments and change our schools if we don't spend the majority of our time focused on helping teachers build the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that they need to thrive in this new world? Now, as I wrap up here, the good news is that we are just getting started, right? We're at the very beginning of this, right? In 1995, 1% of the world was online. And it took 10 years to get to the first billion people. It took 5 years to get to the second billion, and only 4 years to get to the third billion. And yet today, only 40% of the world is online. Russia is around 70, 72% the last time I looked at those numbers, right? The world is just coming online. The opportunities are just getting there. The technology is finally at the point where it's usable, where you can take advantage of the technology, where the cost of the technology is at a point where you can take advantage of it. So we are at the very, very beginning of this, but it's exciting to see what's happening. I think this is the most exciting time in education. This is the picture of a school that I'm involved here in Phoenix, which is right down the street from where I live, called the Phoenix Coding Academy, where we're taking all these principles and bringing them to life, where we're doing an inquiry-based learning model where kids are actually driving their learning, but they're also learning computer science and programming as a core language that they're going to need for the 21st century. Not all of them are going to turn into programmers, but they're all going to learn computer science as a core functionality in everything they do, because they recognize, and we recognize, that computer science is in everything that we do, in every industry, across every state, in everything that we ever want to design or build. Computer science is part of that. So we're just starting to do that. And this is a school where kids are driving that learning. There's no homework, there are no grades, and it's all project-based learning. And we're really excited that this is just one school of many schools that are all over the world that are demonstrating that this works, that you can take advantage of these models and really bring them to life. And so as I close out, as we think about technology, as we think about what technology we have in front of you, I want you to think about that technology that you have. And then I want you to picture a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old who's just getting their way on getting into the school system, a 5-year-old who's just figuring out how to do things. I want you to think about whatever technology you have, whether it's your and William will appreciate this, your MacBook, right? Or your Chromebook, or your Nexus tablet, or your Nexus phone, or your iPhone, or iPad, whatever that technology is, whatever that latest and greatest technology is that you have. I want you to think about that 5-year-old and realize that that's the worst technology that 5-year-old will ever see in their life, right? They are going to grow up in a world where the technology is constantly improving, constantly getting better. And so we have to ask ourselves, how do we take advantage of that? How do we create learning models and opportunities for them to use technologies and enabling and supporting capability? That's our calling. That's what we need to figure out. And that's why I think it's the most exciting time in education. Thank you guys very much for having me. Appreciate your time. Yes, absolutely.
Евангелист образования Google Джейми Касап.